Sarah's heart stopped as she looked into the eyes of her adopted son and saw her own childhood memories staring back at her. In that moment, she knew their connection went far beyond mere coincidence, plunging her into a mystery that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her past. Sarah Thompson stood at the kitchen window, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Outside, the early morning mist clung to the trees, shrouding the quiet streets of Maplewood in a ghostly veil. She took a sip, savoring the bitter warmth as it spread through her chest, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in her bones over the past few weeks. The sound of small feet padding down the stairs broke her reverie. Sarah turned, forcing a smile as Ethan, her recently adopted 7-year-old son, appeared in the doorway. His sandy hair was tousled from sleep, dark circles shadowing his eyes. "Good morning, sweetie," Sarah said, her voice soft. "Did you sleep okay?" Ethan shrugged, his small shoulders rising and falling beneath his oversized pajama top. "I guess," he mumbled, climbing onto a chair at the kitchen table. Sarah's heart clenched. She knew "I guess" meant another night of restless sleep, of muffled cries and tangled sheets. She moved to the refrigerator, pulling out a carton of milk. "How about some cereal? I bought that rainbow one you like." As she poured the brightly colored loops into a bowl, Sarah studied Ethan's face. In the 3 months since she'd brought him home, she'd grown accustomed to the furrow in his brow, the way his eyes darted around as if constantly on alert. But this morning, there was something different, a heaviness, a weariness that no child should carry. "Ethan," she began, sliding the bowl in front of him. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Even the scary stuff." He nodded, mechanically spooning cereal into his mouth. Sarah waited, hoping he might open up, but the silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft clink of spoon against bowl. A knock at the back door startled them both. Mike Sullivan, Sarah's next-door neighbor, peered through the glass pane, waving a greeting. Sarah gestured for him to come in. "Morning, Thompsons," Mike said as he entered, his firefighter's uniform crisp and neat. He'd been a constant presence since Sarah moved in, always ready with a helping hand or a dad joke. "Just checking in before my shift. How are you two doing?" "We're managing," Sarah replied, shooting a glance at Ethan, who had shrunk into his chair. "How about you? Any exciting rescues planned for today?" Mike chuckled, leaning against the counter. "Just the usual, rescuing kittens from trees, helping little old ladies cross the street. You know, hero stuff." His attempt at levity fell flat as Ethan suddenly pushed away from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I don't feel good," he mumbled, bolting from the room. Sarah and Mike exchanged worried looks. "Sorry," Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "He's been having a rough time lately." "Nightmares?" Mike's jovial expression softened into concern. "Poor kid. Anything I can do to help?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't think so. I'm taking him to see Dr. Chun this afternoon. Hopefully she can shed some light on what's going on in that little head of his." As if on cue, a crash sounded from upstairs, followed by a terrified scream. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat as she raced towards the stairs. Mike closed behind. They found Ethan in the hallway, curled into a ball, his eyes wide with terror. Shards of glass from a fallen picture frame littered the floor around him. "Ethan!" Sarah cried, kneeling beside him. "What happened? Are you hurt?" The boy's lips trembled, tears streaming down his face. "The fire," he whimpered. "I saw the fire again." Sarah froze, her blood turning to ice. Fire. The word echoed in her mind, dredging up memories she'd fought so hard to bury. The acrid smell of smoke, the searing heat, the agonized screams of her family trapped inside their burning home. Mike's steady voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "It's okay, buddy," he said, crouching down to Ethan's level. "There's no fire here. You're safe." As Mike gently checked Ethan for cuts, Sarah struggled to compose herself. This wasn't about her. This was about Ethan, and he needed her to be strong. "Sweetie," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "can you tell me about the fire you saw?" Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Sarah saw something in them that made her breath catch, a knowledge, a depth of understanding that seemed impossibly beyond his years. "It was big," he said, his voice small and far away, and hot. There were people inside, screaming. A girl. She was looking out the window, crying for help. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. The girl at the window that had been her on the night her family died. But how could Ethan know that? How could he possibly see into a past that wasn't his own? Mike's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "Sarah, you okay?" She nodded mechanically, her mind reeling. "Yeah, I'm fine. Ethan, honey, why don't we get you cleaned up and ready for the day? We can talk more about this with Dr. Chun later." As she helped Ethan to his feet, careful to avoid the broken glass, Sarah felt as though she were moving through a fog. The implications of what Ethan had described were too enormous, too impossible to process. Mike helped clean up the glass while Sarah got Ethan settled in the bathroom to wash up. When she returned to the hallway, Mike was examining the fallen picture frame. "This is an old one, isn't it?" he asked, holding up a faded photograph. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was a family portrait, her parents, and her little brother, taken just months before the fire. "Yeah," she managed, taking the photo with trembling hands. From another lifetime, Mike's eyes softened with understanding. As one of the firefighters who had responded to the blaze that claimed Sarah's family, he was one of the few people in Maplewood who knew the full extent of her loss. "Listen," he said gently, "I know you've got a lot on your plate with Ethan, but if you ever need to talk." Sarah nodded, grateful for his support, even as she felt the walls she'd carefully constructed around her past beginning to crumble. "Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it." Single quotes. After Mike left for his shift, Sarah went through the motions of the morning routine, helping Ethan dress and packing his backpack for school. All the while, her mind churned with questions. How could Ethan's nightmares so accurately reflect her own traumatic past? Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more at play, something beyond rational explanation? As they walked to the bus stop, Sarah studied Ethan's profile. In the 3 months since she'd adopted him, she'd grown to love this quiet, sensitive boy with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. She'd thought she was rescuing him, giving him the home and family he'd never had. But now, faced with the impossible knowledge he seemed to possess, she wondered if perhaps it was Ethan who had come to rescue her, to force her to finally confront the ghosts of her past. A yellow school bus rumbled down the street, and Ethan turned to Sarah, his face a mask of anxiety. "Do I have to go?" he asked, his voice small. Sarah knelt down, meeting his eyes. "I know it's hard, sweetie, but remember, Mrs. Rodriguez said you could bring your special worry stone to class, and I'll be right here to pick you up this afternoon for your appointment with Dr. Chun." Ethan nodded, his fingers instinctively reaching for the smooth river rock in his pocket, a grounding technique Dr. Chen had suggested. As he climbed the steps of the bus, he turned back, his eyes locking with Sarah's. "It'll be okay," he said, with a certainty that belied his years. "We'll figure it out together." As the bus pulled away, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and trepidation wash over her. Ethan's resilience amazed her, but his words carried a weight, a promise of challenges yet to come. She walked back to the house, her mind already racing ahead to the afternoon's appointment with Dr. Chen. The respected child psychologist had been a godsend since Ethan's nightmares began, offering support and strategies. But would even she be equipped to handle this new, inexplicable development? Sarah paused at the front door, her hand on the knob. The house suddenly felt different, no longer just the fresh start she'd envisioned when she moved to Maplewood, but a place where past and present were colliding in ways she couldn't begin to understand. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The day stretched before her, hours to fill before she could seek answers. She moved to the kitchen, intent on tidying up the breakfast dishes, when her eyes fell on the family portrait, still lying face up on the counter where she'd left it. Young Sarah smiled out from the photograph, flanked by her parents and brother, all of them gone now. She traced their faces with a trembling finger, memories rising unbidden. The sound of her mother's laugh, the smell of her father's aftershave, the warmth of her brother's hand in hers. "I miss you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "And I'm scared. What's happening with Ethan? I don't understand it. I don't know if I'm strong enough to face this." As if in answer, a warm breeze rustled through the kitchen, carrying with it the faint scent of lilacs, her mother's favorite flower. Sarah closed her eyes, allowing herself, just for a moment, to believe it was a sign, a message from beyond. When she opened them again, her resolve had solidified. Whatever was happening with Ethan, whatever connection existed between his dreams and her past, she would face it head on. She owed it to herself, to her lost family, and most of all, to the little boy who had unexpectedly become her whole world. Sarah carefully returned the photograph to its place on the wall, smoothing it with gentle fingers. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned to face the day ahead, ready to unravel the mystery that bound her and Ethan together in ways she was only beginning to understand. As the morning wore on, Sarah found herself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She moved through the house, straightening pillows and organizing papers, her actions automatic as her mind raced. The revelation of Ethan's vision had shaken her to her core, forcing her to confront memories she'd spent years burying. She paused in front of the hallway mirror, studying her reflection. At 35, Sarah still possessed the same hazel eyes and auburn hair that had once made her the spitting image of her mother. But now, she noticed the fine lines etching the corners of her eyes, the slight furrow between her brows that seemed permanently etched there. The past decade had aged her in ways that went beyond the physical. A framed photo on the nearby shelf caught her attention, a picture of her and Ethan on adoption day, both smiling widely at the camera. Sarah picked it up, her thumb tracing the outline of Ethan's face. She remembered the mix of excitement and terror she'd felt that day, wondering if she was truly ready for the challenges of motherhood. Now, those initial fears seemed almost quaint compared to the mystery unfolding before her. How could she possibly navigate this situation when she couldn't even explain it to herself? The sharp trill of her cell phone cut through her reverie. Sarah glanced at the screen, recognizing the number of Maplewood Elementary. "Hello?" she answered, her heart rate quickening. "Ms. Thompson?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Rodriguez, Ethan's teacher. "I'm calling about Ethan. There's been an incident." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Is he all right? What happened?" "He's not hurt," Mrs. Rodriguez assured her quickly, "but he became very upset during our history lesson. We were discussing local landmarks, and when I mentioned the old firehouse museum, Ethan became hysterical. He kept saying something about a big fire and people being trapped. We can't seem to calm him down." Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I'll be right there," she said, already reaching for her keys. The drive to the school was a blur. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. As she pulled into the parking lot, she caught sight of the old firehouse in the distance. Its red brick facade, a stark reminder of Maplewood's history and her own. In the school office, she found Ethan curled up in a chair, his face buried in his knees. Mrs. Rodriguez stood nearby, her expression a mix of concern and bewilderment. "Ethan, sweetie," Sarah said softly, kneeling beside him. "It's me. Can you look at me?" Slowly, Ethan raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, his cheeks stained with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to be bad." Sarah's heart clenched. "You weren't bad, honey. Sometimes our feelings can be really big and scary. Can you tell me what happened?" Ethan glanced nervously at Mrs. Rodriguez before leaning in close to Sarah. "I saw it again," he murmured. "The fire. But this time, I was awake. It was like I was there, but not there. And there were firefighters and a girl screaming. And he trailed off, fresh tears welling in his eyes." Sarah pulled him into a tight embrace, her mind reeling. The details Ethan described matched perfectly with her own memories of that horrific night. Details she had never shared with him. Details he couldn't possibly know. "Mrs. Thompson," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, "perhaps it would be best if Ethan went home for the rest of the day. And, I don't mean to overstep, but has Ethan been evaluated by a child psychologist?" These episodes seemed to be intensifying. Sarah nodded, helping Ethan to his feet. "We actually have an appointment this afternoon with Dr. Chung. Thank you for your understanding, Mrs. Rodriguez. We'll work on finding some strategies to help Ethan cope better in class." As they walked to the car, Sarah's mind was a tumult of questions and theories. She had always believed in science and rational explanations. But what was happening with Ethan defied logic. Could it be some form of genetic memory, a psychic connection? Or was it something even more inexplicable? The drive home was quiet, Ethan staring out the window with a faraway look in his eyes. Sarah kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, wishing she could peer into his mind and unravel the mystery that seemed to be consuming them both. As they pulled into the driveway, a familiar figure was waiting on the front porch. Dr. Rachel Chun, a petite woman with kind eyes and a serene demeanor, stood up as they approached. "I hope you don't mind," she said, taking in their haggard appearances. "When the school called, I thought it might be helpful if I came by. I had a cancellation this afternoon anyway." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Dr. Chun, you're a lifesaver. Please, come in." Once inside, Dr. Chun settled Ethan in the living room with some coloring materials before pulling Sarah aside into the kitchen. "Sarah," she said softly, "I can see you're troubled. Why don't you tell me what's been going on?" Sarah took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. She told Dr. Chen about Ethan's escalating nightmares, the incident at school, and the impossible knowledge he seemed to possess about her past. Dr. Chen listened intently, her brow furrowing. "Sarah," she said carefully, "I know this might be difficult to discuss, but I need to ask, have you ever shared details about the fire with Ethan?" "Never," Sarah said firmly. "I've barely even talked about it with anyone since moving to Maplewood. The only person who knows the full story is Mike Sullivan, and he would never." She trailed off, a new thought occurring to her. "Dr. Chun, is it possible for trauma to be inherited somehow? Could Ethan be experiencing some kind of genetic memory?" The psychologist considered this for a moment. There is some emerging research on epigenetic inheritance of trauma, but it typically involves direct biological descendants. In Ethan's case, as an adopted child, it's highly unlikely. Sarah's shoulders slumped. Part of her had hoped for a scientific explanation, no matter how far-fetched. "However, Dr. Chun continued, her voice gentle, there are many things in this world that science hasn't yet explained. The bond between a parent and child, even in adoption, can be profound and mysterious." She placed a comforting hand on Sarah's arm. "What I can tell you is this. Whatever is happening, the most important thing is to support Ethan and help him feel safe. And Sarah, that includes taking care of yourself. These experiences are clearly bringing up painful memories for you as well." Sarah nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I thought I'd dealt with all of this," she whispered. "I thought I'd moved on. Trauma doesn't always heal in a linear fashion," Dr. Chun said softly. "Sometimes it takes unexpected turns. But facing it together, with love and understanding, can lead to profound healing for both of you." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the front door. Sarah opened it to find Mike Sullivan standing on the porch, still in his firefighter uniform. "Sorry to barge in," he said, his eyes filled with concern. "I heard about what happened at the school. I thought maybe I could help." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. As Mike entered the living room, Ethan looked up from his coloring book, his eyes widening. "Hey there, buddy," Mike said, crouching down beside him. "I heard you had a tough day. Want to talk about it?" To Sarah's surprise, Ethan nodded. He glanced at her, as if seeking permission, then turned back to Mike. "I keep seeing the fire," he said quietly. "The big one, at the old house on Maple Street. There were people inside, and you were there, trying to save them." Mike's face paled. He looked up at Sarah, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "how does he know about that night?" The room fell silent, the weight of the impossible knowledge hanging in the air. Sarah felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, about to plunge into unknown depths. Dr. Chen cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "it would be helpful if we all sat down together. It seems there's quite a bit we need to discuss." As they arranged themselves in the living room, Sarah caught Ethan's eye. The boy gave her a small, brave smile, and in that moment, she felt a surge of love and protectiveness wash over her. Whatever mysteries lay ahead, whatever truths were about to be uncovered, She knew one thing with absolute certainty. She and Ethan would face it together. Their bond stronger than any force, natural or supernatural, that might try to come between them. As they settled into the living room, an air of anticipation hung heavy in the air. Sarah perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ethan sat close beside her, his small body pressed against her side as if seeking comfort. Across from them, Mike lowered himself into an armchair, his firefighter's uniform a stark reminder of the connection between past and present. Dr. Chun took a seat in a nearby chair, her notepad at the ready. "All right, Doctor," Chun began, her voice calm and measured. "Let's start at the beginning. Ethan, can you tell us about the first time you saw the fire in your dreams?" Ethan glanced up at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. He took a deep breath, his voice small but steady. "It was the night after I came to live with Mom. I was scared, because everything was new. When I fell asleep, I saw the big house. It was nighttime, and there were flames everywhere." As Ethan spoke, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She remembered that first night vividly, how she had been awakened by Ethan's cries, how she had rushed to comfort him, attributing his distress to the upheaval of adoption. Never had she imagined that his nightmares might be rooted in her own tragic past. "Can you describe the house, Ethan?" Doctor Chum prompted gently. Ethan's brow furrowed in concentration. It was white, with green shutters. There was a big tree in the front yard, and a porch swing. He paused, his eyes growing distant. There was a girl at the window. She was screaming for help. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The details were painfully accurate, details she had never shared with anyone in Maplewood, save for Mike. Mike leaned forward, his face etched with concern. "Ethan, buddy, in your dreams, do you see the firefighters?" Ethan nodded. "They're trying to get inside, but the flames are too big. There's a man. He looks like you, but younger. He's yelling, trying to reach the girl, but he can't." Mike's face paled. He turned to Sarah, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's exactly how it happened. I was just a rookie then, but I remember every detail of that night." "How can he know this?" Doctor Chun interjected, her voice calm but firm. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Ethan, these dreams, do they feel like regular dreams or do they feel different somehow?" Ethan considered this for a moment. "They feel real, like I'm really there. And sometimes, when I'm awake, I see flashes of the fire. Like today at school." Sarah wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders, pulling him close. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now, Doctor." Chun made a note on her pad. "Sarah, Mike, I know this might be difficult, but I think it's important that we discuss the events of that night. It might help us understand what Ethan is experiencing." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She had avoided talking about the fire for so long, burying the pain deep inside. But now, with Ethan somehow tapping into those memories, she knew it was time to confront the past. "It was just after my 16th birthday," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I was upstairs in my room when I smelled the smoke. By the time I realized what was happening, the flames had already engulfed the first floor. I could hear my parents and my little brother screaming, but I couldn't reach them." Mike picked up the thread of the story. "When we arrived on the scene, the house was almost fully engulfed. I was the smallest on the team, so they sent me up the ladder to try and reach Sarah. The heat was intense. I'd never felt anything like it. I could see her at the window, terrified. I kept telling her to jump, that I'd catch her, but she was frozen with fear. Sarah closed her eyes, the memories washing over her. I don't know how I finally found the courage to jump. Everything after that is a blur. I remember the hospital, the funerals, the endless questions from investigators. And then, nothing. It's like I shut down completely." Doctor Chun leaned forward, her expression compassionate. "Sarah, trauma can affect our memories in profound ways. It's not uncommon for survivors to block out painful experiences as a coping mechanism." Ethan tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mom, in my dreams, I feel what you were feeling. The fear, the sadness, the guilt. Is that normal?" The room fell silent. Sarah looked to Dr. Chun, her eyes pleading for an explanation. Any explanation that might make sense of this impossible situation. Doctor Chun took a deep breath. What Ethan is describing goes beyond what we typically understand as empathy or even intuition. There are theories in parapsychology about shared consciousness, about the ability of some individuals to tap into the experiences of others. But these theories are controversial and largely unproven in scientific circles. Mike ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. So what you're saying is, there's no rational explanation for this. I'm saying that we're venturing into territory that science doesn't fully understand yet, Doctor. Chun replied carefully. What's clear is that Ethan and Sarah share a connection that goes beyond typical mother-child bond. The question is, how do we help them navigate this connection in a healthy way? Sarah felt a mix of relief and trepidation wash over her. On one hand, having her experiences validated, knowing that she wasn't imagining things or going crazy, was comforting. On the other hand, the implications of what was happening were overwhelming. Dr. Chun, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What do we do now? How do we help Ethan? She trailed off, unable to articulate the swirl of emotions churning inside her. Dr. Chun's expression softened. The first step is to create a safe space for both of you to process these experiences. Ethan needs to understand that what he's seeing and feeling isn't his burden to bear. And Sarah, it's crucial that you allow yourself to confront the trauma you've been carrying all these years. She turned to Ethan, her voice gentle but firm. Ethan, I want you to know that what you're experiencing isn't your fault. You haven't done anything wrong. What we're going to do is work on some techniques to help you feel more in control when these visions come. Ethan nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his face. Can you make them stop? Doctor. Chun shook her head. I can't promise that, but I can help you learn to manage them better. And remember, you're not alone in this. Your mom is right here with you, every step of the way. Sarah pulled Ethan into a tight hug, feeling his small body relax against her. For the first time since this all began, she felt a glimmer of hope. They might not have all the answers, but at least now they had a path forward. Mike cleared his throat, drawing their attention. I want you both to know that I'm here for you, whatever you need. If talking about that night helps, I'm willing to share everything I remember. Sarah gave him a grateful smile. Thank you, Mike. That means more than you know. As the conversation continued, Sarah found herself marveling at the strange turns life could take. She had adopted Ethan hoping to give him a better life, to heal the wounds of his past. Never had she imagined that in doing so, she would be forced to confront her own long-buried pain. Yet as she sat there, surrounded by support and understanding, Sarah felt a shift inside her. The weight she had carried for so long began to lighten, replaced by a fierce determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever mysteries still remained to be unraveled, she and Ethan would face them together. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the living room, Dr. Chun closed her notepad. I think this is a good place to pause for today, she said. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's important to give yourselves time to process. She turned to Sarah and Ethan. I'd like to see you both twice a week for the foreseeable future. We'll work on coping strategies and continue to explore this connection you share. Remember, the goal isn't to sever this bond, but to understand it and learn to live with it in a healthy way. As they all stood, preparing to part ways, Ethan tugged at Sarah's hand. Mom, he said, his voice small but steady. I'm glad we're doing this together. I was scared before, but now I feel like maybe this is special. Like maybe we were meant to find each other. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She knelt down, pulling Ethan into a tight embrace. I think you're right, sweetie, she whispered. Maybe we were. As Mike and Dr. Chun said their goodbyes, Sarah stood at the door, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The future was still uncertain, filled with questions and challenges they had yet to face. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose, a feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. With Ethan's hand in hers, Sarah closed the door, ready to face whatever came next, together. As the days passed, Sarah and Ethan settled into a new routine. Twice a week, they met with Dr. Chun, working through exercises designed to help Ethan manage his visions and Sarah confront her long-buried trauma. The process was challenging, often leaving them both emotionally drained, but there was a sense of progress, of wounds slowly beginning to heal. On a crisp Saturday morning, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching as Ethan played in the backyard. He was building an elaborate fort out of cardboard boxes, his face set in concentration. It was moments like these, glimpses of ordinary childhood, that Sarah clung to, reminders that despite everything, Ethan was still just a little boy. The sound of the doorbell jolted her from her reverie. She opened the front door to find Mike standing on the porch, a folder tucked under his arm. "Hey," he said, offering a small smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I've got some information I thought might be helpful." Sarah stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Not at all. Come in. Ethan's out back if you want to say hello." Mike nodded, following her into the kitchen. Through the window, they could see Ethan waving excitedly, having spotted Mike's arrival. Mike waved back before turning to Sarah, his expression serious. "I've been doing some digging," he said, placing the folder on the kitchen table, "about the fire and about Ethan's background. I hope you don't mind. I thought maybe if we could find some connection, some explanation, it might help." Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Part of her was desperate for answers, for anything that might explain the inexplicable bond between her and Ethan. But another part feared what those answers might reveal. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike opened the folder, spreading out several documents. "First, I looked into the investigation of the fire. I know they ruled it accidental at the time, but I always had my doubts. The way it spread so quickly, the intensity of the blaze. It never sat right with me." Single quotes. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Are you saying it wasn't an accident?" Mike met her gaze, his eyes somber. "I can't say for certain, but there are inconsistencies in the report, things that don't add up. I've asked some colleagues to take a second look, off the record." Sarah sank into a chair, her mind reeling. The possibility that the fire that claimed her family might have been intentional was almost too much to bear. "Why?" she whispered. "Who would?" Mike placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I don't know, Sarah, but I promise you, we'll find out. You deserve to know the truth." He turned back to the documents, pulling out a different set of papers. "Now, about Ethan. I looked into his background, his time in the foster system, before you adopted him. Most of it is pretty standard stuff, but there's something interesting here." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes scanning the pages. "What is it?" "Ethan's biological mother," Mike said, pointing to a name on the document. "Emily Reeves. She was from Maplewood originally. Left town about 8 years ago, right around the time Ethan would have been born." Sarah's brow furrowed. "I don't remember an Emily Reeves. Was she here when the fire happened?" Mike finished. "Yes, she was. In fact, she lived just a few blocks from your old house. And here's the kicker. She was a volunteer at the local psychic research center." Sarah's head snapped up. "Psychic research center? I didn't know we had anything like that in Maplewood." Mike nodded. "It was a small operation, mostly fringe stuff. They closed down years ago, but they were known for experiments in telepathy, shared consciousness, the kind of things Dr. Chun mentioned." Sarah's mind was spinning, trying to connect the dots. "So you think, what? That Ethan's biological mother might have had some kind of psychic ability? That she passed it on to him somehow?" "I don't know," Mike admitted. "It sounds crazy when you say it out loud. But given what Ethan's experiencing, I just thought it might be worth looking into." Sarah stood up abruptly, moving to the window. Ethan was still engrossed in his fort building, blissfully unaware of the conversation taking place inside. She watched him for a long moment, her heart aching with love and fear for this little boy who had become her whole world. "What do we do with this information?" she asked, not turning around. "Do we tell Ethan? Do we try to find Emily Reeves?" Mike came to stand beside her. "I think we should talk to Dr. Chun first, see what she thinks. And Sarah, I think it's time we revisited the scene of the fire. If we're going to uncover the truth, we need to start at the beginning." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at the thought of returning to the place where she had lost everything, But she knew Mike was right. If they were ever going to understand what was happening with Ethan, if they were ever going to find closure, they needed to confront the past head-on. "Okay," she said softly, "we'll go. But not today. Today, I just want to be here with Ethan. To have one more normal day before everything changes again." Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." As Mike gathered up the documents, prepared to, Sarah called out to Ethan. He came bounding in, his cheeks flushed with exertion and excitement. "Ma! Mike!" he exclaimed. "Did you see my fort? It's going to be the best fort ever." Mike crouched down to Ethan's level, a genuine smile breaking through his serious expression. "I did see it, buddy. It looks amazing. You'll have to give me a tour when it's finished, okay?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "Mom can come too. We can all have a picnic in the fort." Sarah felt her heart swell with love and a fierce protectiveness. In that moment, she made a silent vow. Whatever truths they uncovered, whatever challenges lay ahead, she would do everything in her power to preserve Ethan's innocence, to give him the childhood he deserved. As Mike said his goodbyes, Sarah pulled Ethan into a tight hug. "How about we make some lunch, sweetie? And then I'll come help you with your fort." Ethan's face lit up. "Can we have grilled cheese? And tomato soup?" "Absolutely." Sarah laughed, ruffling his hair. "Grilled cheese and tomato soup it is." As they moved about the kitchen together, Sarah tried to push aside the swirling thoughts and questions Mike's visit had stirred up. For now, she would focus on this moment, on the simple joy of making lunch with her son, on the sound of his laughter, on the warmth of his small hand in hers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations. But today, in this kitchen, with the smell of melting cheese filling the air and Ethan's chatter a comforting backdrop, Sarah allowed herself to simply be a mother, loving her child. As they sat down to eat, Ethan regaled her with elaborate plans for his cardboard fortress. Sarah listened intently, marveling at his imagination, at the resilience of children. Despite everything he had been through, the loss of his birth parents, the years in foster care, the strange and frightening visions he now experienced, Ethan still found joy in the simple things. "Mom?" Ethan said suddenly, his tone serious. "Are you okay? You look sad." Sarah blinked back the tears that had begun to form. "I'm not sad, sweetie. I'm so grateful for you. You know that, right? No matter what happens, no matter what we learn or discover, you are the best thing that's ever happened." Ethan's face softened into a smile. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me too, Mom. Even with the scary dreams. I'm glad I'm here with you." As they finished their lunch and headed back out to continue work on the fort, Sarah felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead might be difficult, filled with uncomfortable truths and painful memories. But with Ethan by her side, she knew she could face anything. Together, they would unravel the mystery that bound them. Together, they would find healing and hope. And together, they would build a future filled with love, understanding, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. The following week passed in a blur of routine and anticipation. Sarah and Ethan continued their sessions with Dr. Chun, each meeting bringing new insights and challenges. Dr. Chun had listened intently to the information Mike had uncovered, her brow furrowing in concentration. "This certainly adds an interesting dimension to Ethan's experiences," she had said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "The possibility of a genetic predisposition to psychic abilities is not entirely outside the realm of scientific inquiry, though it remains highly controversial." Now, as Sarah stood in front of her bedroom mirror, preparing for the day ahead, she couldn't shake the feeling of standing on the precipice of something monumental. Today was the day they would return to the site of the fire, the day she would confront the ghosts of her past head-on. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Ethan peeked in, already dressed in jeans and a sweater, his hair sticking up at odd angles. "Mom, are you ready?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Sarah crossed the room, kneeling down to smooth his hair. "Almost, sweetie. Are you sure you want to come? You don't have to if it feels too scary." Ethan shook his head firmly. "I want to come. I want to help you remember. The simplicity and determination in his statement brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She pulled him into a tight hug, marveling at the strength of this little boy who had become her world. "Okay," she said, standing up and taking a deep breath. "Then let's do this together." As they made their way downstairs, Sarah spotted Mike's truck pulling into the driveway. He had insisted on accompanying them, both for emotional support and to provide any insights from his perspective as a firefighter. The drive to the old neighborhood was silent, tension thick in the air. Sarah stared out the window, watching as familiar landmarks slid by. It had been years since she'd ventured into this part of town, the memories too painful to confront. As they turned onto Maple Street, Sarah felt her heart begin to race. The charred remnants of her childhood home had long since been cleared away, replaced by an empty lot overgrown with weeds. But in her mind's eye, she could still see the white house with green shutters, the porch swing where she had spent countless summer evenings. Mike parked the truck, turning to Sarah with concern in his eyes. "We can take this as slow as you need. If it gets to be too much, just say the word and we'll leave." Sarah nodded, unable to form words. She opened the door with trembling hands, helping Ethan out of the back seat. As her feet touched the sidewalk, a wave of memories washed over her. The sound of her mother's laughter, the smell of her father's pipe tobacco, the warmth of family dinners around the kitchen table. Ethan's small hand slipped into hers, anchoring her to the present. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered. "I'm here." Single quotes. Together, they approached the empty lot. The grass was overgrown, dotted with wildflowers that had taken root in the absence of human care. Sarah's eyes scanned the ground, half expecting to see remnants of her past life scattered among the weeds. As they reached the center of the lot, Ethan suddenly stiffened. His grip on Sarah's hand tightened, his eyes growing wide and unfocused. "Ethan?" Sarah said, alarm rising in her voice. "Sweetie, what's wrong?" Ethan's voice, when he spoke, was distant and strange. "I can see it, the house. It's so clear." Mike stepped closer, his face etched with concern. "What do you see, buddy? Can you describe it?" Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. "The porch swing is moving, but there's no wind. There's a girl. She's reading a book, and a boy, younger, playing with a toy truck." Sarah felt her knees go weak. The scene Ethan described was so vivid, so achingly familiar. That's me and my brother," she whispered. "The summer before the fire," Ethan continued, his voice taking on an eerily adult cadence. "There's a man watching from across the street. He looks angry. He's holding something." "A lighter?" Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes meeting Mike's in a moment of shocked realization. "A man? Ethan, are you sure?" But Ethan didn't respond. His eyes had rolled back in his head, his small body beginning to tremble. "Ethan!" Sarah cried, dropping to her knees beside him. "Ethan, come back to me. Please, baby, come back." Mike was already on the phone, calling for an ambulance. Sarah gathered Ethan in her arms, rocking him gently as she had when he was first placed in her care. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe. Come back to me." Slowly, agonizingly, Ethan's eyes fluttered open. He looked up at Sarah, confusion and fear etched on his young face. "Mom, what happened?" Sarah pressed a kiss to his forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's okay, baby. You're okay. We're going to get you some help." As the wail of sirens filled the air, Sarah's mind was reeling. The image Ethan had described, a man with a lighter, sent chills down her spine. Could it be possible? After all these years, could they finally be uncovering the truth about the fire that had claimed her family? The next few hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors and worried conversations. Dr. Chun arrived shortly after they reached the emergency room, her calm presence a balm to Sarah's frayed nerves. This kind of intense psychic experience can be extremely taxing on the body and mind. Dr. Chun explained as they waited for Ethan's test results. "Especially for someone so young. But I want you to know, Sarah, that what Ethan experienced, what he saw, it could be incredibly significant." Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving the door to Ethan's room where he was being examined. "He saw a man," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. With a lighter, Dr. Chun. If the fire wasn't an accident, Dr. Chun placed a comforting hand on Sarah's arm. Let's not jump to conclusions, but if there is more to the story of that night, it's possible that Ethan's abilities are helping to bring the truth to light. Mike, who had been pacing the hallway, stopped in front of them. I've called in some favors, he said, his voice low and urgent. If there was foul play involved in the fire, we're going to find out. I promise you that, Sarah. As the day wore on, Ethan's test results came back normal, much to everyone's relief. The doctors recommended rest and close monitoring, but found no physical explanation for his episode. As Sarah sat by Ethan's bedside that night, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, she felt a strange mix of emotions churning inside her. Fear for Ethan's well-being warred with a burning desire to uncover the truth about her family's fate. And beneath it all, a growing certainty that she and Ethan were bound together by forces beyond their understanding. Forces that were leading them towards a revelation that would change everything. She reached out, gently smoothing Ethan's hair. We're going to figure this out, she whispered. I don't know how, but we will. And no matter what happens, no matter what we discover, I will always be here for you. Always. As if in response, Ethan stirred slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sarah leaned back in a chair, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but her mind racing with possibilities. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. The journey to the truth had only just begun. The days following Ethan's episode at the site of the fire were filled with a tense mixture of worry and anticipation. Sarah took time off work to stay home with Ethan, watching him closely for any signs of distress. But aside from being a bit more tired than usual, Ethan seemed to bounce back quickly, his resilience a constant source of amazement to Sarah. Meanwhile, Mike had been true to his word, calling in favors and reopening the investigation into the fire. Sarah found herself torn between a desperate need to know the truth and a fear of what that truth might reveal. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table sorting through a stack of medical bills, her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Found something. Coming over. ETA 20 minutes. Sarah's heart began to race. She glanced into the living room, where Ethan was engrossed in a video game, debating whether to send him to his room. In the end, she decided against it. Whatever Mike had discovered, it would affect Ethan too. They were in this together. When Mike arrived, his face was grim but determined. He nodded a greeting to Ethan before turning to Sarah. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. Whatever it is, I think we should all hear it together. Ethan's a part of this too. Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. They settled in the living room. Ethan nestled close to Sarah on the couch, while Mike took the armchair. Okay, Mike began, his voice low and serious. I've been going through old case files, talking to retired officers who were around back then, and I found something interesting. He pulled out a folder, spreading several documents on the coffee table. There was a string of arsons in Maplewood in the months leading up to the fire at your house, he explained. Small fires mostly, a shed here, an abandoned building there. Nothing big enough to raise major alarms. But looking back, there's a clear pattern. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents. And you think these fires are connected to what happened to my family? Mike nodded grimly. I do. And here's where it gets really interesting. One of the retired detectives remembered interviewing a suspect in connection with these fires. A local man named Frank Pearson. They couldn't pin anything on him at the time, but the detective always felt there was more to the story. Sarah's brow furrowed. Frank Pearson. Why does that name sound familiar? Because, Mike said, pulling out an old newspaper clipping, he used to work at the Psychic Research Center, the same one where Ethan's biological mother volunteered. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She felt Ethan stiffen beside her, his small hand gripping her arm tightly. Mom? Ethan's voice was small and uncertain. I think I've seen him. In my dreams. Sarah and Mike exchanged a startled look. What do you mean, sweetie? Sarah asked it gently. Ethan's brow furrowed in concentration. Sometimes, when I see the fire, there's a man watching. He looks angry, scary. Is that Is that him? He pointed to the grainy photo in the newspaper clipping. Mike leaned forward, his voice gentle but urgent. Ethan, this is very important. Are you sure it's the same man you've seen in your visions? Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the photograph. Yes, it's him. He started the fire, didn't he? The room fell silent, the weight of Ethan's words hanging heavy in the air. Sarah pulled him close, her mind reeling. Could it be possible? After all these years, could they finally be uncovering the truth about that terrible night? Mike cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. I've reached out to some contacts, trying to track down Frank Pearson. Last known address was in a town about an hour from here. I thought maybe we could pay him a visit, see if we can get some answers. Sarah felt a surge of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, a desperate need for closure. She looked down at Ethan, seeing the same mix of emotions reflected in his young face. What do you think, sweetie? She asked softly. Do you feel up to this? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as if seeing something beyond the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was small but determined. I think we have to, Mom, for your family, for us. Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She turned to Mike, squaring her shoulders. Okay, let's do it. But I want Dr. Chun to come with us. If Ethan has another episode, Mike nodded in agreement. Of course. I'll give her a call, see if she can clear her schedule for tomorrow. As Mike made the arrangements, Sarah sat with Ethan, holding him close. She marveled at the strength of this little boy, at the depth of his compassion and his willingness to face the unknown for her sake. You know you don't have to do this, right? She whispered. If it feels too scary or too overwhelming, we can stop at any time. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes wise beyond his years. I know, Mom, but I want to help. And I think maybe this is why we found each other. Maybe we're supposed to solve this mystery together. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She pressed a kiss to the top of Ethan's head, overcome with love and gratitude for this extraordinary child who had come into her life. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a crisp autumn day that belied the tension thrumming through the Thompson household. Sarah moved about the kitchen on autopilot, packing snacks for the journey and triple-checking that she had all of Ethan's medications. Dr. Chun arrived just as they were finishing breakfast, her calm presence a balm to Sarah's frayed nerves. How are you both feeling? She asked, her eyes moving between Sarah and Ethan. Nervous, Sarah admitted, but ready. I think we need this. Whatever we find out. Ethan nodded in agreement, his face set in a determined expression that seemed incongruous on his young features. The drive to Frank Pearson's last known address was tense, the car filled with a nervous energy that seemed to crackle in the air. Mike drove, with Dr. Chun in the passenger seat, leaving Sarah and Ethan huddled together in the back. As they neared their destination, Sarah felt her heart begin to race. She clutched Ethan's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. Whatever lay ahead, whatever truth they were about to uncover, she knew that they would face it together. The car slowed as they turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street. Modest houses with well-kept yards lined either side. Mike pulled up in front of a small, blue bungalow, its paint peeling slightly and its garden overgrown. This is it, he said, his voice tense. Are we ready? Sarah took a deep breath, looking down at Ethan. He nodded, his eyes wide but determined. We're ready, she said. As they approached the front door, Sarah felt as though she were moving through a dream. Everything seemed slightly off-kilter, the colors too bright, the sounds too sharp. She was dimly aware of Mike knocking on the door, of Dr. Chun's steady presence beside her. And then the door opened, and Sarah found herself face to face with the man who had haunted Ethan's visions. The man who, if their suspicions were correct, had destroyed her family and altered the course of her life forever. Frank Pearson was older than in the newspaper photo, his hair now gray and his face lined with age. But his eyes, cold, calculating eyes, were exactly as Ethan had described. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Sarah felt Ethan's grip on her hand tighten, heard his sharp intake of breath. And then, in a voice that seemed to come from very far away, she heard herself speak. "Mr. Pearson? We need to talk about the fire." Frank Pearson's eyes widened in recognition, a flicker of something. Fear? Guilt? Passing across his weathered face. For a moment, it seemed as though he might slam the door shut. But then his shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had suddenly settled upon them. "I suppose it was only a matter of time," he said, his voice rough with age and perhaps regret. "You'd better come in." As they stepped into the dimly lit living room, Sarah felt as though she were crossing a threshold into the past. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and cigarette smoke. The walls lined with shelves crammed full of tomes on psychic phenomena and the paranormal. Frank gestured for them to sit on a worn sofa while he lowered himself into an armchair that had seen better days. His eyes darted between Sarah and Ethan, a look of curiosity and something akin to fear in his gaze. "You're Sarah Thompson," he said. Not a question, but a statement. "And this," his eyes lingered on Ethan, "this must be the boy. The one with the gift." Sarah felt Ethan press closer to her side. She wrapped an arm around him protectively. "How do you know about Ethan?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she'd intended. Frank sighed, running a gnarled hand through his thinning hair. "Word travels in certain circles. Even after all these years, I still have connections to the psychic research community. When news of a boy with extraordinary abilities surfaced, well, I had my suspicions." Mike leaned forward, his posture tense. "Mr. Pearson, we're here about the fire that killed Sarah's family. We have reason to believe you might know something about it." Frank's gaze dropped to his hands, which were twisting nervously in his lap. "I've been waiting for this day," he said softly, dreading it really, but also hoping for it in a way, the chance to finally unburden myself. He looked up, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "I owe you the truth, Miss Thompson, all of it. But I warn you, it's not a pleasant story, and it may change the way you see everything, including yourself." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced at Dr. Chun, who gave her an encouraging nod. "We're ready to hear it," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt, no matter how difficult. Frank nodded, taking a deep breath. "It all started at the research center. We were doing experiments in telepathy and shared consciousness. Your mother was one of our subjects." Sarah gasped. "My mother?" But she never mentioned anything about psychic research. She wouldn't have, Frank said. "We swore all our subjects to secrecy. But your mother, she was special. She had abilities unlike anything we'd ever seen. She could tap into other people's minds, experience their memories, their emotions. We thought we were on the verge of a breakthrough, of proving the existence of psychic phenomena once and for all." He paused, his expression darkening. "But then things changed. Your mother started experiencing visions, premonitions, dark things. She became convinced that our experiments were opening doors that should stay closed, tapping into forces beyond our understanding." Sarah leaned forward, her heart racing. "What kind of forces?" Frank's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "She believed we were making contact with something else, something not of this world. She wanted to shut down the experiments, to destroy all our research. But I couldn't let that happen. It was my life's work, you see." A heavy silence fell over the room. Sarah felt as though the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Beside her, Ethan sat perfectly still, his eyes wide and focused intently on Frank. "The night of the fire?" Frank continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I went to your house. I was going to try one last time to convince your mother to continue the experiments. But when I got there, I saw her burning all of our research notes in the backyard. I lost control. We argued. Things escalated. And then he trailed off, his eyes filling with tears. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. The fire. It was an accident. A terrible, terrible accident." Sarah felt as though the world was spinning around her. She gripped Ethan's hand tightly, anchoring herself to the present. "You're saying you started the fire that killed my family?" Frank nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I knocked over a lantern during the struggle. The flames spread so quickly. Panicked. I ran. And I've been running ever since, haunted by the knowledge of what I'd done." Mike was on his feet in an instant, his face a mask of anger. "You're under arrest," he began, reaching for his handcuffs. But before he could take a step, Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "Wait," he said, his voice oddly calm. "There's more, isn't there, Mr. Pearson?" All eyes turned to Ethan. Frank stared at him, a mixture of fear and awe on his face. "You can see it, can't you, boy? You have your grandmother's gift." Sarah's head was spinning. "Grandmother? What are you talking about?" Frank turned back to Sarah, his expression grave. "Your mother's abilities. They were genetic, passed down through the female line of your family for generations. You have it too, Sarah, though it seems you've suppressed it, buried it deep inside." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "No, that's impossible. I'm not psychic. I don't have any special abilities." "Don't you?" Frank asked softly. "Think about it. The way you've always been able to read people, to sense their emotions. The dreams you used to have, the ones that came true. And now, your connection with Ethan. It's all part of your inheritance. Sarah, a gift and a curse, passed down through your bloodline." Sarah felt as though the ground had dropped out from beneath her. Memories flooded her mind, inexplicable moments of intuition, dreams that had felt more like visions. The strange sense of connection she'd felt with Ethan from the moment they'd met. But Ethan isn't biologically related to me," she stammered. "How can he have these abilities?" Frank shook his head. "The boy's abilities are his own, but your connection to him, the way his visions tap into your past, that's your gift recognizing his." Two psychic minds reaching out to each other across the void. Dr. Chen, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "Mr. Pearson, these are extraordinary claims. Do you have any proof?" Frank nodded, rising slowly from his chair. "I do. Your mother, she left something with me, Sarah. Something she wanted you to have when you were ready. I think perhaps that time has come." He shuffled over to a locked cabinet, his hand shaking as he fumbled with the key. From inside, he withdrew a small, ornate box. "She called it the dream catcher," he said, holding it out to Sarah. "It's been in your family for generations. It's said to amplify psychic abilities, to allow the user to navigate the realm of thoughts and memories." Sarah reached out, her hand trembling as she took the box. As her fingers closed around it, she felt a jolt of energy race up her arm. Beside her, Ethan gasped. "Mom," he whispered, his eyes wide. "I can see it. I can see everything." And suddenly, Sarah could see it too. Images flashed before her eyes. Her mother, young and vibrant, participating in experiments at the research center. Generations of women in her family, each bearing the gift, passing it down. The night of the fire, her mother's desperate attempt to protect her family from forces she didn't fully understand. As the visions faded, Sarah found herself back in Frank's living room, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Ethan, seeing the same mix of wonder and fear in his eyes that she felt in her heart. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chun leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "We proceed carefully," she said. "This is a lot to process for both of you. We need to take time to understand these abilities, to learn how to control them." Mike, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and concern, cleared his throat. "And what about him?" he asked, nodding towards Frank. "He's confessed to causing the fire. We can't just ignore that." Sarah looked at Frank, seeing not the monster she had imagined for so many years, but a broken old man, consumed by guilt and regret. "I don't know," she said softly. "I need time to think, to process all of this." Frank nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions," he said. "But please, Sarah, use the dream catcher. Learn to control your abilities, and help the boy do the same. Don't let the mistakes of the past haunt another generation." As they prepared to leave, Sarah felt as though she were stepping into a new world, one where the boundaries between mind and matter, past and present, were more fluid than she had ever imagined. She looked down at Ethan, seeing the same mix of excitement and trepidation in his eyes that she felt in her heart. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges they would face as they explored their newfound abilities, Sarah knew one thing for certain: they would face it together, bound not just by love, but by a shared gift that transcended the boundaries of blood and time. As they walked out of Frank's house and into the bright sunlight, Sarah felt a sense of both ending and beginning. The mystery of her past had been solved, but a new journey, one filled with wonder, danger, and infinite possibilities, was just beginning. The drive back to Maplewood was filled with a heavy, contemplative silence. Sarah sat in the back seat with Ethan, the ornate box, the dream catcher, cradled in her lap. She could feel its energy pulsing softly, like a heartbeat, calling to something deep within her that she had long suppressed. Ethan leaned against her, his eyes half closed but his mind clearly racing. Every now and then, he would murmur something under his breath or twitch slightly, as if reacting to images only he could see. In the front seat, Mike and Dr. Chun spoke in low, urgent tones, discussing the legal and ethical implications of Frank's confession and the broader ramifications of Sarah and Ethan's newly revealed abilities. As they pulled into Sarah's driveway, Dr. Chun turned to face them. "I think it would be best if we all took some time to process what we've learned today," she said gently. "Sarah, Ethan, I'd like to see you both first thing tomorrow morning. We need to start working on understanding and controlling these abilities." Sarah nodded numbly, still feeling overwhelmed by the day's revelations. As they got out of the car, Mike pulled her aside. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need to report Frank's confession, but I can give you a day or two if you need time to decide how you want to handle this." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for her friend's understanding. "Thank you, Mike. I need some time to think about all of this, to figure out what it means for me and Ethan." As Mike and Dr. Chun drove away, Sarah and Ethan made their way into the house. The familiar surroundings felt strange now, as if they had returned from a journey to another world. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was small and uncertain. "What do we do now?" Sarah set the dream catcher on the coffee table and pulled Ethan into a tight hug. "Now, we rest," she said softly. "We've learned a lot today, and we need time to let it all sink in. How about we order pizza and watch a movie? Something light and fun?" Ethan nodded, a small smile breaking through his serious expression. As Sarah called in their order, she watched Ethan settle on the couch, his eyes drawn to the dream catcher. "Can we open it?" he asked as she hung up the phone. Sarah hesitated. Part of her was desperate to unlock the secrets contained within the ornate box, to fully embrace the abilities she had denied for so long. But another part, the cautious, protective mother, held her back. "Not tonight, sweetie," she said, joining him on the couch. "Tonight, we rest. Tomorrow, we'll start figuring all of this out together." As they settled in to watch a lighthearted animated film, Sarah found her mind wandering. She thought of her mother, of the burden she must have carried knowing the truth about their family's abilities. She thought of Frank Pearson, a man driven to terrible acts by his pursuit of knowledge. And she thought of Ethan, this extraordinary child who had come into her life and changed everything. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone in the living room, the dream catcher before her. Her fingers traced the intricate patterns carved into its surface, feeling the thrum of energy beneath. Taking a deep breath, she slowly opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a small, crystalline object. As Sarah lifted it out, it began to glow softly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Suddenly, the room around her seemed to fade away. Images flashed before her eyes. Her mother, young and vibrant, using the dream catcher to explore the depths of her abilities. Generations of women in her family, each bearing the gift, each facing their own challenges and triumphs. And then, Sarah saw herself, not as she was now, but as she could be. Confident, powerful, using her abilities to help others, to bridge the gap between minds and hearts. Beside her stood Ethan, older, his own powers refined and controlled. As the vision faded, Sarah found herself back in her living room, tears streaming down her face. For the first time since learning of her abilities, she felt not fear or confusion, but a sense of purpose. This gift, passed down through generations, was not a curse to be feared, but a responsibility to be embraced. With newfound determination, Sarah carefully replaced the crystal in the dream catcher and closed the lid. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries. But tonight she would rest, gathering her strength for the journey ahead. As dawn broke the next morning, Sarah awoke to find Ethan already up, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, staring intently at the dream catcher. "I can hear it, Mom," he said as she entered the room. "It's like it's singing to me." Sarah knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I hear it too, sweetie. Are you ready to learn more about what we can do?" Ethan nodded, his face set in a determined expression that seemed too mature for his young features. "I'm ready. I want to understand. I want to help people, like in your vision." Sarah started, surprised. "You saw that?" Ethan nodded. "Last night, when you opened the dream catcher, I saw it all, Mom. I saw us working together, doing amazing things." A wave of emotion washed over Sarah, pride, love, and a touch of fear at the immense responsibility they now faced. She pulled Ethan into a tight hug, marveling at the strength and resilience of this extraordinary child. As they prepared for their appointment with Dr. Chun, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Any decisions, Frank? Department. Asking questions." Sarah sighed, the weight of the past settling on her shoulders once again. She knew she couldn't put off this decision forever, but the thought of pursuing legal action against Frank felt wrong somehow. Despite the pain he had caused, his actions had set in motion a chain of events that had led her to Ethan, to the discovery of her true self. "What is it, Mom?" Ethan asked, noticing her furrowed brow. Sarah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm trying to decide what to do about Mr. Pearson, about the fire." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his young face screwed up in concentration. I think we should forgive him," he said finally. Sarah blinked in surprise. "Forgive him? Ethan? He's the reason I lost my family." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I know, but he's also the reason we found each other. And I can feel how sorry he is, Mom. It's like a big, heavy sadness that follows him everywhere." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Once again, Ethan's wisdom and compassion astounded her. She knelt down, meeting his eyes. "You're right, sweetie. Holding on to anger and resentment, it won't bring my family back, and it won't help us move forward." She picked up her phone, quickly typing out a response to Mike. "No charges. We'll explain later. Set up a meeting with Frank. There's more to discuss." As they headed out the door to meet Dr. Chun, Sarah felt a sense of lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and potential dangers. But with Ethan by her side, and with the newfound understanding of her abilities, she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Dr. Chen was waiting for them in her office, a serene smile on her face as they entered. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I hope you both got some rest. We have a lot to cover today." Sarah and Ethan settled onto the comfortable couch, the dream catcher nestled between them. Dr. Chun leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. "Before we begin," she said, "I want you both to understand that what we're dealing with here goes beyond traditional psychology or even parapsychology. We're entering uncharted territory, but I promise you, we'll take it one step at a time." She turned to Sarah. "Let's start with you, Sarah. When did you first notice your abilities? Even if you didn't recognize them for what they were at the time?" Sarah took a deep breath, thinking back. "I guess I've always been good at reading people, knowing what they're feeling, sometimes even before they do. And there were dreams, vivid dreams that sometimes came true." Dr. Chan nodded, encouraging. "That's often how it starts. Subtle intuitions, precognitive dreams. Did you ever feel overwhelmed by other people's emotions? Like you were absorbing them?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Yes, especially in crowded places. I always thought I was just sensitive or introverted. What you're describing is a form of empathic ability," Dr. Chun explained. "The capacity to sense and sometimes even experience the emotions of others. It's a powerful gift, but it can also be overwhelming if not properly managed." She turned to Ethan. "And you, Ethan, your abilities seem to manifest differently. Can you describe what you experience when you have a vision?" Ethan scrunched up his face in concentration. "It's like I'm watching a movie, but I'm in it too. I can see and feel everything, and sometimes I can change things in the vision. Doctor. Chun's eyebrows rose. Fascinating. It sounds like you may have a form of remote viewing, possibly coupled with some precognitive abilities. And the fact that you can interact with your visions, that's quite extraordinary. She leaned back, her expression thoughtful. What you both possess are rare and powerful gifts, but they also come with great responsibility. Learning to control and direct these abilities will be crucial. Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. Where do we start, Doctor? Chun smiled. We start with the basics. Meditation, grounding exercises, learning to build mental shields. And then we'll explore the full potential of what you can do. Together, as Dr. Chun began to guide them through a simple meditation exercise, Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was who she was meant to be, who she had always been beneath the layers of grief and self-doubt. And Ethan, this remarkable child who had come into her life, was not just her son, but her partner on this incredible journey. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever wonders and dangers they might face, Sarah knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would face it all together, bound by love, by shared gifts, and by a destiny that was only beginning to unfold. As the weeks passed, Sarah and Ethan fell into a new routine. Their mornings began with meditation exercises, learning to center themselves and build mental shields against the constant influx of psychic energy. Afternoons were spent with Dr. Chun, exploring the depths of their abilities and learning to control them. The Dreamcatcher became a central part of their training. Under Dr. Chun's guidance, they learned to use it as a focal point, a tool to amplify and direct their psychic energies. Sarah marveled at how quickly Ethan took to the training, his young mind seemingly more adaptable to the strange new reality they found themselves in. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the window of Dr. Chun's office, they faced a new challenge. Today, Dr. Chun said, her voice calm but tinged with excitement, we're going to attempt something more advanced. Sarah, I want you to try to establish a psychic link with Ethan, not just sensing his emotions, but actually entering his mindscape. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Is it safe? She asked, glancing at Ethan, who was practically bouncing with anticipation. Dr. Chun nodded reassuringly. With the proper precautions, yes. And I'll be here to guide you both through the process. Ethan, are you comfortable with this? Ethan nodded eagerly. I want to try, Mom, he said, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. I think it might help us understand each other even better. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. All right, she said. Let's do it. They sat facing each other, knees touching, the Dreamcatcher placed between them. Dr. Chun's voice guided them through the process, instructing them to slow their breathing, to focus on the connection they already shared. Sarah closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind. At first, she felt nothing but the usual swirl of her own thoughts. But then, gradually, she became aware of something else, a presence, familiar yet different. Ethan. She pushed further, gently, carefully. Suddenly, the world behind her eyelids exploded into color and sensation. She was no longer in Dr. Chun's office, but in a vast, ever-changing landscape that she somehow knew was Ethan's mindscape. Rolling hills of vibrant green gave way to towering forests, their leaves shimmering with impossible colors. In the distance, she could see a city of crystal spires, pulsing with energy. And everywhere, flowing through the air like ribbons of light, were Ethan's thoughts and memories. Mom? Ethan's voice echoed around her, filled with wonder. Can you see it? Can you see my world? I can see it, sweetie, Sarah replied, her own voice sounding strange and distant. It's beautiful. As she moved through this mental landscape, Sarah began to understand Ethan in a way she never had before. She saw his fears, dark, thorny patches in the otherwise lush mindscape. His hopes and dreams manifested as soaring birds of light. And everywhere, woven through it all, was his love for her, a warm, golden glow that suffused everything. But there was something else too, something that made Sarah's heart clench with a mixture of pride and sorrow. In a quiet glade, surrounded by towering trees, she saw a shimmering pool. As she approached, she realized it was filled not with water, but with memories. Memories that didn't belong to Ethan. She saw flashes of her own childhood, of her parents and brother. She saw the night of the fire, felt the heat and terror as if she were living it herself. And she understood. Ethan had been carrying these memories, this pain, trying to understand and help her in the only way he knew how. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, feeling tears spring to her eyes. "You don't have to carry this burden alone. We can face it together." As if in response to her words, the landscape began to shift. The dark, thorny patches receded, the crystal city grew brighter, and the pool of memories seemed to settle, becoming calmer and less turbulent. Slowly, gently, Sarah felt herself being drawn back to her physical body. She opened her eyes to find herself back in Dr. Chun's office, Ethan beaming at her with tears in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with awe. That was amazing, Doctor." Chun leaned forward, her expression a mixture of excitement and professional curiosity. "What did you experience?" she asked. As Sarah and Ethan recounted their shared journey, Dr. Chun took copious notes, occasionally interjecting with questions or observations. When they finished, she sat back, a look of wonder on her face. "What you've accomplished today is extraordinary," she said. "The level of psychic connection you've achieved, it's beyond anything I've ever encountered in my research." She turned to Sarah, her expression serious. "Sarah, what you saw in Ethan's mind, the memories, the emotions, it confirms something I've suspected for a while now. Ethan's abilities go beyond simple precognition or remote viewing. He's an empath of incredible power, capable of not just sensing emotions, but absorbing and carrying the experiences of others." Sarah felt a wave of protectiveness wash over her. "Is it dangerous for him?" she asked, reaching out to take Ethan's hand. Dr. Chun shook her head. "Not inherently, no. But it does mean that Ethan will need to learn very strong mental shielding techniques. And Sarah, you'll need to be vigilant. Help him process these absorbed experiences. Teach him to differentiate between his own emotions and those he's picked up from others." Ethan squeezed Sarah's hand. "It's okay, Mom," he said, his voice surprisingly mature. "I want to help people. If I can understand what they're going through, maybe I can make things better." Sarah felt a surge of love and pride, so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. She pulled Ethan into a tight hug, marveling at the strength and compassion of this remarkable child. As they left Dr. Chun's office that day, Sarah felt a shift in her perspective. The abilities she and Ethan shared were not just tools or curiosities. They were a responsibility, a chance to understand others on a profound level, to offer comfort and healing in ways she had never imagined possible. Over the next few months, their training intensified. They learned to create and maintain psychic shields, to project thoughts over distances, to sift through the constant influx of psychic information without becoming overwhelmed. Sarah found herself growing more confident, more at peace with herself than she had been in years. The grief and guilt she had carried for so long began to ease, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. Ethan, too, flourished under the guidance of Dr. Chun and the unwavering support of his mother. His control over his abilities grew by leaps and bounds, and he began to show an uncanny knack for helping others work through their emotional struggles. It was on a snowy evening in late December that everything changed once again. Sarah and Ethan were in the living room, practicing a new shielding technique, when there was an urgent knock at the door. Sarah opened it to find Mike standing on the porch, his face grave. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight with worry. "We need your help. There's been a kidnapping. A little girl, just 5 years old. We've got no leads, and time is running out. I thought maybe you and Ethan might be able to help." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. This was it, the moment when their abilities would be put to the test in the real world with real lives at stake. She turned to Ethan, who had come to stand beside her. His young face was set in a determined expression. "We have to help, Mom," he said softly. "We can do this." Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and resolve settle over her. "All right, Mike," she said. "Tell us everything you know. We'll do whatever we can." As Mike began to brief them on the details of the case, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was why they had been given these gifts, why they had been brought together, to help, to heal, to make a difference in the world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers they might face, Sarah knew that she and Ethan would face them together. United by love, bound by their extraordinary abilities, they were ready to step into their new roles as guardians, as beacons of hope in a world that desperately needed it. The true test of their abilities and their courage was about to begin. As Sarah and Ethan followed Mike to his car, the gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy cloak. The winter night was bitingly cold, snowflakes swirling in the glow of the streetlights. Sarah clutched the Dreamcatcher tightly, its familiar weight a small comfort in the face of the daunting task ahead. "Her name is Lily," Mike explained as they drove through the quiet streets of Maplewood. She was taken from her bedroom sometime between 8 p.m. and midnight. Parents didn't realize she was gone until they went to check on her this morning. Sarah felt Ethan's hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly. She could sense his determination, but also his fear. This was no longer a training exercise or a controlled experiment. A child's life hung in the balance. They arrived at the police station, a hive of activity despite the late hour. Detective Ramirez, the lead on the case, met them at the door. Her eyebrows rose skeptically as Mike introduced Sarah and Ethan. "Look, Sullivan," she said, her voice tight with stress. "I know you vouch for them, but we don't have time for unconventional methods. Every minute counts." Mike stood his ground. "Trust me, Maria. They can help. Just give them a chance." Detective Ramirez sighed, then nodded curtly. "Fine, but make it quick." They were led to a small conference room where photos and maps were spread across a large table. In the center was a school picture of Lily, a smiling little girl with bright blue eyes and a missing front tooth. Sarah knelt down next to Ethan, placing the Dreamcatcher on the table. "Are you ready, sweetie?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, his young face set in concentration. "I can do this, Mom. For Lily." They sat facing each other, hands linked over the Dreamcatcher. Sarah could feel the skeptical gazes of the police officers, but she pushed that awareness aside, focusing entirely on Ethan and the task at hand. "Remember what Dr. Chum taught us," she murmured. "Breathe deeply, center yourself, then reach out, gently. Don't push too hard." Sarah closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind. She could feel Ethan's presence, bright and determined. Together, they extended their awareness, pushing past the confines of the room, of the police station, of Maplewood itself. At first, there was nothing but a swirling chaos of thoughts and emotions, the collective consciousness of the sleeping town. But then, guided by their shared purpose, they began to sense something else. A thread of fear, of confusion, of desperate longing for home. "Lily," Sarah gasped as the connection solidified. Through Ethan's extraordinary empathic abilities, amplified by their psychic link and the power of the Dreamcatcher, she could sense the missing girl as clearly as if she were in the room with them. "I see her," Ethan whispered, his voice distant. "She's scared, cold. It's dark, but I can smell pine trees and old wood, like a cabin." Sarah relayed the information to the detectives, who scrambled to note everything down. "Can you see anything else, Ethan?" she prompted gently. "Any landmarks, signs, anything that might help us find her?" Ethan's brow furrowed in concentration. There's a lake. I can hear water lapping at a shore. And, wait, I can see a sign. It says Crystal Lake Campground." Detective Ramirez was already on her feet, barking orders into her radio. "Crystal Lake is about 30 miles north of here," she explained. "It's mostly deserted this time of year, but there are some old cabins." As the room erupted into activity, Sarah focused on maintaining the connection with Ethan. She could feel the strain it was putting on him, the way he was pushing his abilities to their limit. "You're doing great, sweetie," she murmured. "Just a little longer. Can you sense anything about the person who took Lily?" Ethan's face contorted, a mix of concentration and distress. He's angry, scared. I don't think he meant to take her. It was an accident. and now he doesn't know what to do. Sarah relayed this information to Detective Ramirez, who nodded grimly. That tracks with what we know. The girl's father owed money to some dangerous people. This might have been meant as a warning that went too far. As the police prepared to move out, Sarah gently guided Ethan back to full consciousness. He blinked, looking dazed and exhausted. "Did we help?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Sarah pulled him into a tight hug. "You did amazing, Ethan. You might have just saved Lily's life." Detective Ramirez approached them, with skepticism replaced by a look of grudging respect. "I don't pretend to understand what just happened here," she said, "but if you've led us to Lily, you've done more in an hour than we managed in a day. Thank you." As the police rushed to mobilize, Sarah and Ethan waited anxiously in the conference room. Mike stayed with them, providing updates as they came in. The minutes stretched into hours, the tension growing with each passing moment. Finally, just as the first light of dawn was beginning to streak the sky, Mike's radio crackled to life. "We've got her," came Detective Ramirez's voice, thick with emotion. "Lily's safe. We're bringing her home." The room erupted in cheers and sighs of relief. Sarah pulled Ethan close, feeling tears of joy and exhaustion spring to her eyes. They had done it. They had made a real, tangible difference. As the adrenaline of the night began to fade, Sarah realized just how monumental this moment was. Their abilities, once a source of fear and uncertainty, had become a force for good. They had saved a life, brought a family back together. In the days that followed, as news of Lily's rescue spread through Maplewood, Sarah and Ethan found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of attention. There were questions, of course, skepticism, disbelief, even fear from some quarters. But there was also gratitude, wonder, and a growing sense of possibility. Dr. Chun helped them navigate the sudden scrutiny, advising them on how to protect their privacy while still using their gifts to help others. They began working more closely with the police, lending their abilities to help solve cold cases and find missing persons. But it wasn't just criminal investigations that benefited from their unique talents. Sarah found herself counseling people in emotional crisis, using her empathic abilities to help them work through trauma and pain. Ethan, with his extraordinary capacity for understanding and absorbing others' experiences, became a beacon of hope for troubled children, helping them process their emotions in ways traditional therapy couldn't match. As winter gave way to spring, Sarah stood in their backyard, watching Ethan as he helped a group of neighborhood kids build an elaborate fort. His laughter rang out, bright and carefree, and Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The journey that had begun with tragedy, the loss of her family, the years of grief and self-doubt had led her to this moment. She had found not just a son in Ethan, but a partner, a kindred spirit. Together, they were learning to use their extraordinary gifts to bring light to the darkness, to offer hope where there had been none. As she fingered the dream catcher, now a constant presence around her neck, Sarah thought of her mother, of the long line of gifted women in her family. For the first time, she felt not burdened by this legacy, but empowered by it. She and Ethan were part of something greater than themselves, a bridge between worlds, between minds and hearts. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, dangers, and those who would seek to exploit their abilities. But as Sarah watched Ethan play, his face alight with joy, she knew that they were ready to face whatever came their way. Their story, the story of a woman who adopted a boy, only to discover an extraordinary connection to her past and a shared destiny, was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. But whatever the future held, Sarah knew one thing with absolute certainty. She and Ethan would face it together, bound by love, united by their extraordinary gifts, and dedicated to using their abilities to make the world a little bit brighter, one mind, one heart at a time. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Sarah called out to Ethan. He came running, his face flushed with excitement, and threw himself into her arms. "Mom," he said, his eyes shining, "I was thinking, maybe we could start a school for other kids like me, to help them understand their gifts and learn to use them to help people." Sarah felt her heart swell with pride and love. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetie," she said, ruffling his hair. "Maybe we can talk to Dr. Chun about it tomorrow." As they walked back into the house, hand in hand, Sarah felt a sense of excitement for the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever wonders they might discover, she knew that together, she and Ethan could accomplish anything. Their extraordinary journey was only just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!